Welcome back to Decent Med. Today we are here with our first nutritionist on the platform, Lori Graham. Lori, introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. So, I am a recovering occupational therapist, as I've said before to Sam. I spent many years in the traditional medicine model, fixing problems that were medical problems that were really symptoms of chronic disease, like people with diabetes and amputations, to orthopedic issues, to stroke, to neurological diseases. And many of these conditions, I did home care, so I would practice musculoskeletal rehab as well as therapeutic interventions to help people become more independent. And it became very clear to me that my way of living my life would have helped many of these patients if they had actually implemented diet and lifestyle changes earlier on in their lives. And so a naturopath that I saw said, "Why don't you study functional medicine?" So I went to a conference and it all started then. And I remember walking into this room and I felt like I'd come home. There were doctors that were committed to look at the root cause versus treating symptoms. There were doctors that were disenfranchised with traditional medicine, working in those 10-minute slots of times that they had, just slapping on, a med prescription to treat a symptom of a disease. And I was humbled, and I knew it was something I had to pursue. So fortunately, because I had a license, a professional license, a medical license, they accepted me into the program and I trained, and then I went on to finish a master's in exercise science, then got a postmaster's in clinical nutrition, and got my certification in functional medicine right at about the same time.
Wow. And that's the reason why our platform wanted to focus on people that were experienced. You see online, there's so many people that are self-prescribed gurus, but they don't actually have the training. People want to get holistic health, but they still want the expertise that comes from doctors. In your opinion, what is that disconnect between holistic nutritionists and doctors, or what is the difference?
At least nowadays, are the exception, but most medical schools do not teach doctors nutrition. Better model for healthcare would be for every medical practice to have a nutritionist in their office. That would be a better practice, rather than a doctor saying you need to lose you know, 50 plus pounds. Why don't we give you somebody that's going to help you and see you regularly? And they should pay this person under their umbrella with their profit so it doesn't have to come out of the pockets of patients. Because many
100%.
patients don't really even have the money for that. Um, but in nutrition, especially in functional medicine, like I went to a school that taught functional medicine nutrition. In fact, the director of my program taught for the Institute for Functional Medicine, which was why I chose that program. So I learned to look at blood tests from that root cause perspective. I learned to connect the dots of, let's say, a cardiovascularly oriented blood test and go, oh, homocysteine's high. That puts you at risk for heart disease. Maybe we ought to look at your genetics and see if you can even methylate is what it's called, but turn folic acid into methylfolate so that you can do this function in your blood so your liver can detoxify. And like we were able to start learning physiology at a much deeper kind of level than an RD might, and certainly more than, like you talked about, health coaches. Like health coaches are instrumental, but I think health coaches should really be under the guidance or the leadership or the mentorship or the supervision of somebody who carries a license. There are things I always say, I'm not a medical doctor. And you ask the question, what is it about having a license? Like I've always wanted to go to the naturopath, the homeopath, and not the medical doctor because I wanted to know from a food as medicine, diet and lifestyle kind of perspective from a deeper level. What could we fix with supplements? What could we do differently with exercise? I wanted to look from that angle. But I remember years ago going to some holistic medical doctors, and all they were doing really was treating symptoms with supplements, which is still not root cause. You could take someone who's, let's say, a vegan. You and I eat much closer to the earth, but if you're truly a vegan, you might have some micronutrient deficiencies, especially if you're training a lot, and especially as you get older. And so, to me, like personalization is the terrain of functional medicine because no two people are the same. And so you might take a supplement because you're not getting something from your diet, but that's different than treating the symptom of sluggishness in the morning with something else. Do you understand what I'm saying?
100%, especially when you talk about when it comes to vegan diet and training. I'm a big fan of mixed martial arts, and a lot of people are. And a commonality I actually found, or a correlation, was there was two fighters. One was Nate Diaz, and the other one was Sean O'Malley. Both were vegan at the time. And O'Malley, he switched from a vegan diet to a meat diet and ended up becoming a champion. And Nate Diaz, his career slowly tailored off as he was eating a vegan diet. And I
Right.
also like how you said personalization, because you're right, not everyone is the same. Some people are lactose intolerant, some people, can't metabolize different meats or cheeses, and to put a prescription on everyone isn't wise. And even finally, when you talk about the healthcare world, and you talk about how they use a lot of supplements, an interview that we did in this series was with a doctor named Tim Shannon, and he's a naturopath and or he's a homeopath, and he was talking about using, homeopathic drugs and modifications of behavior for things like ADHD and also when it comes to, cancer. Uh,
Mhm.
but to your point, I think you'd agree with me, and I'd like you to speak on this, that 80% of disease can be attributed to diet and lifestyle.
I would say when you're talking about chronic disease, we're talking about disease that can, in fact, be modified, reversed through diet and lifestyle. There are some genetic diseases that very few that are harder to make a change with. Um, and then certainly if you break a leg, I don't think diet and lifestyle is going to make a change necessarily. So we look at like medicine is phenomenal when it comes to emergency medicine. If I had a heart attack, you better believe I want to be taken care of and diagnosed. And, or if I came with these weird symptoms, or if I had a car accident, I would want that. But for everything else, why aren't we taking better care of ourselves so that we can thrive as we age? I know a woman never shares her age, but I'm 68 and I'm not on meds, so somebody has to kind of like wonder, well, how many people are like that? How many people, but I work hard at it. I do. I stick with, I'm not a vegan anymore. I don't eat dairy per se, but do use whey protein powder because it helps me with my protein needs. I'll do grass-fed yogurt, Greek yogurt, and I do eat wild Alaskan, wild salmon, herring that's wild, sardines, but I still maintain a large basis of plants in my diet. As I've gotten older, I eat fewer carbs. I'm a woman, I'm modest, I'm athletic. I want to stay athletic. I don't want to have, a belly like my grandmother or be buxom like my grandmother was, you know? So there are ways to get through life. Like, I had one hot flash in menopause or in transition. And other than that, like I'm not one of those people that necessarily thinks I need bioidentical hormones. I keep my bones strong. I wear a weighted vest and walk the dog in the morning. Like, I think as we age, especially as women age, but even as men age, you need to pull on all the levers you can to keep your muscles strong. Muscle is the organ of longevity. It makes it so you can dispose of glucose better if you have more muscle mass, so you're less inclined to get diabetes. Like, there's a lot of things we can use diet and lifestyle to shift the journey into growing old. Like, the normal longevity kind of curve is after about, I don't know, maybe 55, 60, there's this rapid decline. But people who exercise is considered almost more important than diet. It doesn't mean don't eat well, but exercise is that lever that you have to even pull on even more. And we're talking about building muscle through resistance training, building muscle so that we build our bones and we don't fall and we have that metabolic flexibility.
To your point about, people that are aging, as someone that's 68 and a holistic nutritionist, what are some tips that you can give to help combat aging for both men and women, from a holistic nutritionist perspective?
Well, first of all, I would not go to a traditional doctor and get a traditional cholesterol panel. I would maybe even go to, if you're a woman, go to your OBGYN, maybe your doctor, maybe for men, they go to a urologist and look for the panels that will tie in hormones, but also a deeper look into the nuances like the size, the shape, the buoyancy of all your LDLs. You want to look at whether you're an overproducer or an underabsorber or an overabsorber of cholesterol. You want to see if you have the genetic component. You want to make sure your homocysteine levels aren't too high. So it's a complex, it's like Quest has it and Boston Heart has it. I would get educated. I would reach out to a functional medicine practitioner. I'd do that kind of a lab. That's number one. Number two, treat with food. So for instance, if you have, here's a good example. Fibrinogen is a measure that you'd see on this blood test, and it's the thickness of your blood. We need fibrinogen, but we don't want our blood to be too thick because we don't want a clot in our blood, in our vessels. We want a clot if we get a cut, you know? So there's an ideal level that should be at. And if your blood gets too thick, maybe you need to bring down the thickness by, believe it or not, increasing your omega-3s. Hemp, chia, and flaxseed are known to bring down fibrinogen levels, and those are foods. And those are foods that can go into a smoothie, that can go into a cereal, so honestly, doing a lab like that can be, you look at somebody who has inflammation, almost everybody should be on a really good fish oil. and they could take up to 2,000 IU a day. We need to follow our vitamin D. Most people are deficient in vitamin D. I
Yep.
think every mainstream doctor at this point since COVID would probably be willing to test, vitamin D because we know how much it's associated with your immune system. It's also associated with your bone health. You want to look at your magnesium levels. These are these are simple things to look at, but most people are deficiency in magnesium. Have a deficiency in magnesium, but magnesium is so important to convert food into energy.
Hmm. So how does that play a role in diabetes and people struggling with diabetes or pre-diabetics?
So we tend to glycate as we get older. Glycation is something that happens almost on the genetic level. It happens on the genes. There are labs that actually look at that are in kind of like the biological age labs. There are companies that look at that, but we our our hemoglobin A1C is a glycation of glucose, and glucose red blood cells, they survive for about 3 months. So they're looking at 3 months worth of how much glycation is going on. We will glycate more as we age. What do we do to not glycate? We've got to keep our blood sugars a little more normal. We've got to build more muscle. Sometimes it isn't even that our glucose is that high. We need to look at insulin. We need to look at our fasting insulin levels, because if fasting insulin is elevated, then that is like a sign of like war in the bloodstream, is the way I look at it. It is destructive, it is pro-growth, but insulin will keep coming out until it can't come out anymore, until the pancreas can't make anymore. But it's one thing to lower blood glucose with the help of insulin. It's a whole other thing for that insulin to get the glucose through the cell wall into like the bloodstream and into cells, and that does not happen as effectively if we're inflamed. And one of the things that happen as we age is inflammation goes up. So the inability to get glucose into our bloodstream and into our cells to help make energy or convert the glucose into energy can't happen if the glucose can't get into the cells because we're inflamed. So how do we keep inflammation down? And that's why it's like so important to also look at C-reactive protein on a blood test. It
Oh,
should be below 1, but the blood tests usually say like below 8. But below 1 really means you have no inflammation going on. It's not normal to have pain when you get older, but most people think it is.
that's crazy because so many people, as they age, their pain starts to go up. And
Women
like you
in
said, it's all
menopause,
due to inflammation. Is that correct?
yeah, women in menopause oftentimes get frozen shoulder. I didn't know that until I started, reading more about it because I didn't experience it, you know? I mean,
So
the only type of pain I ever had was overuse from running marathons or triathlons, and you have a bumpy night's sleep the night after all that overexertion, and then everything's back to normal. But just exercising every day helps me sleep better. It is not normal to have pain. It is not normal to get up with a foggy head in the morning, but we think it's normal because it's happening to us. Oh, it's just aging. It's not normal.
So, what are some things that your clients struggle with the most?
Staying the course on a clean diet. Most of my patients are older women, I would say through menopause already. And it does become a little bit harder to lose weight. I think we have to be all that much more diligent and be more low carb than ever before. Um, but I find that women, when they start to feel better, it helps with, okay, I'm going to eat healthfully. It helps that. And then I layer in, okay, now it's time to start exercising, and you can afford a little cheat here and there, etc. But always look at the scale, look at your body composition. I'm more about the body composition than the number on the scale, but I'm big with these women. You got to get out and exercise. And there was a great book, Atomic Habits, and they talk about like learning new habits when you're older is a little bit harder, but sometimes, like if you need to take a supplement before bed, keep it next to your toothbrush. You always brush your teeth before you go to bed. Like any new habit, try to collapse it or combine it with something you already do. So if you're walking the dog in the morning, go a little longer, break out in a little run with the dog, get your heart rate up higher, you know. Weights. I mean, it's really important we wear weights. I wear a weighted vest when we walk our dog now. That's a change I made just because I would not be going to the gym 4 times a week to lift weights. I'd rather do yoga that's more intense. I'll go to the gym once or twice a week, but I'd rather be in the pool. So wearing the vest has been a great compromise for me. Go up a hill with a vest on, you know. I gotta tell you, your heart rate goes up. So I am so big on exercise, because if you can't move, and believe it or not, so exercise increases something called BDNF. Have you heard of it? So it's brain derived neurotrophic factor, and exercise increases it. And what is brain derived neurotrophic factor? It helps us fight off Alzheimer's.
Wow.
So I don't think you need to learn a foreign language. I think you need to exercise so you keep the blood circulating in your brain. I think it's more a circulatory issue and a toxin issue and a nutrient issue.
Interesting perspective because my father, we worry about him when it comes to Alzheimer's, and we were thinking about getting him one of those brain games. But I like that you said, because he works out all, consistently, and I like that you said that it working out and exercise helps more with nutrition for seniors than ever before. And I love that you mentioned that it doesn't have to be something that takes an hour out of your day. It really is something that you can supplement like walking your dog, because so many people, especially, people who are professionals, they say they don't have time to work out. And I love how you say that there's ways to implement these little changes.
There's something called exercise snacks that has kind of made its way into social media, but I love that concept because you could be sitting at your desk. And how many people work from home nowadays? Like even my 35-year-old son and daughter-in-law work from home. Go up and down the stairs, do 20 jumping jacks, do some push-ups. Um, my husband's more retired than I am, so to say. I work part-time, but he's truly retired, but he's active all day. He'll be in the garden, he's fixing something around the house, but he's up and around and moving. Wear a tracker so you get real data on what you're doing. So for your dad's sake, if he's active during the day, he might, if he's on Medicare, most people don't know this, but Medicare Advantage gives you benefits like a gym membership. Like I get Lifetime. They have the best exercise classes included, and I get it for free under my United Healthcare. You know, Aetna doesn't have Lifetime, they have LA Fitness, but I had Aetna at the very beginning when I had Medicare, and I went to LA Fitness and I started taking yoga again. So honestly, go get a training with a trainer. Maybe your dad just needs to do some weights. Maybe he needs to work on balance. That's a big thing. As we age, we need to work like I have this little thing I do. I make sure I put on my socks while I'm standing. Did yoga years ago. I used to lift my toe up in my hand and hold it out in front of me and raise my arm out to the side. Yeah, but I was like 27 when I did that. And so the closest I can come to that now is okay, I can put my socks on standing, like standing on one foot. So like think about yoga is great for that because you do practice one-legged stands. So, get your dad involved in, something like at a gym that maybe he can get it on his Medicare benefit and get him doing weights and stretching and just add to that walking the dog and movements. And, in yoga, if you do a real, not a hatha relax yoga, but you do a vinyasa-ish kind of yoga, you are pushing against your own body weight.
Just the transition. You've spoken
Yeah.
before about cholesterol. And there's so much talk about what's good when it comes to cholesterol and what's bad. As a holistic nutritionist, give your take on cholesterol.
So I love that you're asking that question because that's like a hot spot. So we have back in the day, like around the 1950s, cholesterols used to be maybe even the 40s, but cholesterols used to hit 300, 350, and nobody ever said boo about it. But then maybe it was Reagan. I could be wrong in my history of this. Couldn't have been Reagan. Maybe it was before then. I don't know. But somewhere, at some point in our history, came in the drug companies with statins, whatever year statins came to be, and they lowered the standard down to like 220. And now they're talking about it being below 200, and that's what you see on a blood test. And any doctor I know would look at my blood test, any traditional doctor. In fact, my traditional doctor would say you need to be on a statin. My functional medicine doctor would say, but look, your triglycerides are in the 70s and your HDL is, in the high 80s, and you don't have a problem with your hemoglobin A1C because your metabolics are good. So the newer research that's been evolving that is more believable to me is we can't just blame the cholesterol because LDL, first of all, somebody did, I don't remember the doctor's name, but it was brilliant. It was so well said, but he was talking about the glycocalyx, which is the inner lining of our blood vessels, and it makes that inner lining like moss, like slimy, so things slide through. So nothing can get stuck in there if it doesn't get thick or sticky. But LDLs are too large, and I'm making this number up, but if the space in between the cells in the glycocalyx is 1 millimole, I'm making that up. An LDL might be 10 millimole. An LDL is not going to get in there, but we need nutrients coming through our bloodstream to get in there to nourish and get into the capillary bed. But it's only when we insult that inner, vasculature that LDL can get in there. So how do we not insult it? Well, we live in a more toxic world, right? We do. So we have to eat a polyphenol rich diet. We need to eat more plants. We don't have to be vegans. We need to eat more plants. We need to personalize so that if you're sensitive to XYZ and I'm sensitive to ABC, and meaning it makes inflammation in our respective bodies, we need to avoid those foods and lower the inflammation. But what this doctor also said that just blew me away, yeah, that's right, like in a soulful kind of way, the sun nourishes our glycocalyx. That is such like a miraculous, that is so miraculous that the sun doesn't cause skin cancer. It nourishes our inner linings of our blood vessels. Do you know, powerful. And I sent it to myself, so I'll send it over to you because I was like, oh my God, that is, like that is just, we need the sun. We need the sun. We are getting skin cancer from what we put on our skin to block the sun.
So you mentioned polyphenols. In your opinion, what are the best polyphenols to combat aging?
It's not so much what are the best polyphenols, it's eat anything that has bright colors. Every single plant food has different colors. You have blueberries, you have raspberries, you have cherries, you have oranges, you have green broccoli. Like all these foods are very rich in polyphenols. Even red kidney beans have polyphenols. Even tea has polyphenols. Coffee has polyphenols. Onions that are white have polyphenols. Every plant-based food has polyphenols. And there's a few companies out right now that are making polyphenol GLP-1 agonist like products. And I always wondered, why don't I walk around like with a ravenous appetite? And I think it's because I've been eating plant-based. I do, because those polyphenols, I mean, like I'd have to fast until 2 o'clock in the afternoon to get hungry. I'll eat earlier, but I'd have to literally fast a long, long time, like 16 hours until I get hungry. But I think because I eat so many plants, I don't think, I don't, I think I get this natural kind of, appetite suppressing. And I've always been like that, So polyphenols are in everything that's nature.
So you mentioned fasting. What's the benefit of fasting for fighting disease?
Fasting is amazing. And listen, fasting has been in the Jewish tradition for Yom Kippur. It's been in, like ancient biblical times, but even in yoga, people fasted. And I went when I was in my 20s and I was doing meditating and fasting. And, I would fast for a week on broths and juicing. Like I never did a water fast. So what's the benefit? Like, first of all, now that we know we study fasting more from a scientific perspective than we did 40 years ago, but it's not a new thing, you know what I mean? But what happens, especially inside of, like, let's say a 5-day kind of fast, by day 3, your body goes into autophagy, which is a recycling of all, excuse me, not all, but old organelles, meaning that it's kind of like your water bottles. They have to get recycled. You got to recycle this stuff. And the body has an innate wisdom to make use of some things that can be combined with other things and they get reused, kind of like your plastics. They go into leggings. But the point is that other things will just get, you know, out of your body through your kidneys or your stool. By day 5 of a fast, you'll be in stem cell growth. Now, that's a longevity tool. As we get older, we don't have as many stem cells, or we can have stem cell treatment to get younger, but we can achieve that through fasting. There is research that shows that you're in a mild state of autophagy if you do like an 18-hour fast. So some people will fast for, there are people that do what's called an OMAD, they eat one meal a day. I don't think that's great for women, especially for long term. I think it's a great switch up. But doing that kind of fasting is likely to put you in a mild state of autophagy as well. So I really do believe in fasting, but I think the older we get, as women in particular, we will create bone loss, and we have to be careful about that. I think that for older women, intermittent fasting, time restricted eating is better than like fasting for 5 days, that kind of a thing.
What's the difference between ketosis and autophagy?
So ketosis is when you're burning fat for fuel. And an interesting thing about ketosis is our toxins that we kind of breathe, maybe wear, eat, they are stored in our fat. Our fat has this amazing capacity to send that stuff to the periphery into the fat cells to keep it away from the heart and our lungs. I mean, it's brilliant. It's really a brilliant setup. But we need to break down fat, which is ketosis, in order to release those toxins. And people who, you ever hear of a Herxheimer reaction? So if somebody, let's say, has candida, and that's not a good thing to overgrow in your body, like it's in your blood, but or in your gut, it should be in community with other bugs that keep it at bay. But if it takes charge, all right, that's what happens is we're detoxing from that. If you're detoxing and you get a headache, that means that's like a Herxheimer reaction. So some people, when they release stuff from fats, it's the same thing. They get a headache, they feel lethargic. And some people's liver enzymes don't detoxify as quickly as another person, and the person who doesn't detoxify as well is likely to have that Herxheimer, that kind of not feel so good, you know. So some people need to do some kind of other support to help that detoxification happen and to help usher the toxins out of the body. But fasting, autophagy, is literally on a cellular level saying, okay, okay, here's a good example. Red blood cells live for about 3 months. What happens afterwards? They will die, right? But your body can't just have a pile of red blood cells waiting to go out in the next garbage. If you're detoxing on a regular basis and you're doing autophagy and intermittent fasting, you will get rid of those dead red blood cells, just as an example. So there needs to be absence of calories. You can have water, you could have black coffee. You're flying under the radar of insulin. There's no growth going on. That's autophagy. So when you see muscle builders who are like taking peptides and, protein shakes and things of that nature, they actually are in a pro-growth state. That's called mTOR. Have you ever heard of mTOR? mTOR is just a metabolic pathway that is pro-growth. And it's okay to be pro-growth, but cancer is pro-growth. So you don't want to be always in pro-growth. You want to also have periods of being under the radar and not in pro-growth and in detoxifying and healing. And then you go into pro-growth again. So cancer is like turned on all the time in pro-growth.
especially when it comes to metabolic pathways.
Yeah.
So I will close with this. Given the distrust for traditional medicine, why should someone opt for holistic health?
I think if you find a practitioner that you resonate with, that is able to discern what needs medical attention and what doesn't, what can be shifted through dietary and lifestyle modifications, that's the first thing you should try. I think there's a place for medicine, but I also think medicine is really misguided. So
Mhm.
I think everybody has a different tolerance level. I had a patient, this was really uncomfortable. Um, she got off her insulin and all her oral meds. I never told you the end, one of the stories related to her care, but she went to her medical doctor before moving to Belize, and she was an expat, and the medical doctor was mortified by her cholesterol, but she'd also, her hemoglobin A1C dropped from like 8.6 down to 6.8 or something like that. Like she was definitely improved. And she was so focused on the cholesterol. And she's like, how could you put her on a high fat diet? And I'm thinking, I didn't tell her to go out and eat like McDonald's and bacon. I told her to eat fish. I told you to eat avocado. I told her to eat olives. This doctor shredded me, wanted my name, and I didn't fight her because she wanted to talk to me. And I called because I was going to do the right thing. And I was shredded, and I was afraid she would, like go after my license. That is not a doctor I would ever go to. And that
Wow.
patient is never going back to that doctor because she is misinformed. She's completely misinformed. If you have high blood sugar, you should be off starchy carbohydrates, period, end of sentence. You shouldn't have fruits. You should be eating healthy fats. And grass-fed steak is a healthy fat. You know, it's high in omega-3s. It's anti-inflammatory, and to see a change in blood sugar where somebody can be in range if she really eats keto and maybe goes no higher than 140 and comes back down to about 80 is pretty impressive from somebody who was at 350 to 420. Sam, back in the day when you got older, you wanted a mainstream doctor who, if God forbid you went to the hospital, your doctor would go there. But we have hospitalists in the hospital now. The doctor that sees you in the medical office is not the doctor who's going to see you if you go into the hospital. So we have to be informed consumers. We need to be educated. We need to we need to seize our health and take back control of our health so that when a doctor is talking to us, we don't have to be afraid of what they're telling us, but we need to be able to ask intelligent questions and to be able to, even if they have to talk to someone like me or to you, to figure out what the truth really is. But you don't have to agree to anything you don't feel comfortable with. So that's why. That's why.
Yeah, 100%. So Lori, aside from the merlinggroupworld.com/nutrition, where can people find you?
Sure, they can call me at 203-829-5349. Just leave a message, or they can go to my website, which is Nutrify Your Life, Nutrifyour life, life.com. And there's a contact me button, and they can email me through there.
That concludes our latest episode of Decent Med. Make sure to visit themerlinggroupworld.com for more. Dysfunctional medicine now available on Amazon.